Welcome to One Africa Radio TV. My name is Puti Matlo. 25 November marks the commemoration of the 16 days of activism, the call to end the gender-based violence. 1 in 3 women is a victim of violence, and children are implicated extremely. As we have this conversation, I'm joined by different guests from different stakeholders. First and foremost, I would like to introduce our Prince Nkosana Mabena, who's from the African Young Indigenous Leaders. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
And then I'm also joined by Nontanta Giane, President, African Renaissance and Diaspora Network.
Thank you.
I'm also joined by Tulisalem Simang, Kosatu Gauteng Provincial Gender Coordinator, Amanda Ndebele, the founder of the People Victory of Foundation, Mr. Headpiece Kabala, Community Development Specialist. Last but not least, our attorney, Ms. Malebo. As we are going to engage the Prince Nkosana, African Young Indigenous Leaders. What does GBV mean?
Thank you, Program Director. I would like first to thank you, people, good listeners out there, and those who have joined us live, and those who are here, and I want to greet everyone that is present at the moment. As we are here to discuss a very, very delicate topic that has visited South Africa in a very difficult times, where we are also facing other challenges. But for us as African young indigenous leaders, we are so concerned about the act of men, because culturally men are supposed to protect women, as we know. But with the pandemic that has come in, now men have become the enemies of women. But we are here to engage on that and see if we can, together with other stakeholders, find solutions to it. But as traditional leaders, we really against what is happening at the moment. Thank you.
On that note, I think the most interesting aspect from the aspect of you as a prince from the African indigenous space, we're saying the gender-based violence must end in Africa as a continent. So looking at various countries like your Nigeria, your Ghana, there are different cultures in terms of how they do things. What would be the difference in terms of how they do things, how gender-based violence is being addressed in other countries in Africa?
Look, thank you. I think, first of all, maybe it's also a good thing to apologize to women on behalf of men out there for what is currently happening. Not all of us are like that, but we must find a way of how we can address it internationally and locally. But if you look, the political situation has perpetuated what is happening. Where we are sitting, we feel that the westernized laws have overcome the customary laws. While you look in other parts of Africa, you recognize that customary law is still held at its highest. Not to say we condone diversity and change, but as much as you change, we remain human beings that are culturally embedded. So now, if you're not going to practice what you know best, then you are bound to be vulnerable to all the new things that are coming into space. And especially with the young people, they are currently westernized. Colonization has taken over, and they are all following the 4th Industrial Revolution and 5th Industrial Revolution. So now, once that space takes place, it becomes difficult to hold everything together. So right now, if you check in Africa, yes, we remember that we are new into this democracy. We are the last country to gain democracy. So always it will be a difficult thing to maintain the standards of customary law against the westernized culture.
Okay. As a woman, a GBV, it's quite a very emotional space to engage. With the programs of the organization, can you further, take us through in terms of the work that you do from your organization?
Thank you very much, Aputi, and good afternoon, everyone. I think, coming from African Renaissance and Diaspora Network, which is an international organization that just not deals with gender-based violence, but we also work, under UN to implement sustainable development goals.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, when you look at gender equality, which is SDG 5, it talks about fighting discrimination against women and girls.
Mm-hmm.
And as an organization, we're not just looking into here in South Africa, but it's the diaspora as well. How do we make sure that policies around the world change, that will positively impact women and girls? How do we use, the platforms that we have, so we're using the we using art, sports, and culture to send out the message out there. So I think we're trying to not just look at one aspect of GBV, but we're saying how can we empower women and girls as well? How can we change the mentality that we have, that women are just the centers of the home, they're supposed to be sitting there and doing nothing. So I think from the global perspective, you think that GBV is only prevalent here in South Africa, but you understand that it's not just here in South Africa, but it affects the whole world. It affects Africa. There's certain places where it's just a no-go when you are a woman. So we're trying to come up with policies that will really make a change, and that will make women feel that they're also humans and they also are part of the world.
Okay. The most interesting conversation that we are having now is that the African young indigenous leaders, have taken us through the challenges as from the aspect of the cultural. You've indicated the most important those goals in terms of the policies. I would want to engage Ms. Tulisile Msimang, who's a COSATU Gauteng Provincial Gender Coordinator. From the government aspect of things, there's been a whole lot of campaigns that are happening. Today is the commemoration of the 16th days of activism. We've got different platforms where there's more engagement. And one of the major questions that I would have is that from the working space in terms of government, how do we internalize the GBV within the working space?
Thank you for having us. I'm coming with a big federation following me right now, and good day to the colleagues here. When you speak of GBV in the workplace, somehow we only think of women, but in the workspace there's men and women. But the most that are more vulnerable is the women, because men tend to harass the women. In the workspace, the management, for example, you'd find that you have a male boss who does not understand that you are coming from a society where you might be having domestic issues, which will then impact on your work environment. And when you get to the working space, the management will just have these demands from you, as the Prince has alluded that, customary laws are now bypassed by what we believe as women are our rights ever since we came into democracy. And it is those rights that our men are then saying, since you have rights, I will show you too. But within the workspace, we tend to say we are all equal. Because at the end of the day, the men seem to have more voice than women. You will, raise a matter that you've been touched by a man in a sexual way. You were passing, a man touched your bum. And for others, it's okay. Why not? It's African. Why are you making a fuss about it? But when a man is being touched the same way, it's always a mom issue, because it's like it's a taboo for them to speak out that women are harassing us. So what we are focusing on as COSATU is to be equal. We are not saying men are not abusing us. We are not saying there's no patriarchy. But because in the space of gender, we are looking at everything and everyone, including the children. When I'm abused in the workspace, I am victimized by my manager. I'm going to take it back home. And when I get home, I may affect my family, which may also then trigger, some darkness in the men in the house. So one way or another, gender-based violence affects both the society and the workplace.
Very interesting. What you just mentioned, it's a very sensitive subject to even be discussed within the corridors of the offices, where even when a colleague is experiencing that, it becomes hard for them to retaliate and say do not, because of the fear. Probably that person is also coming from an environment where he or she is being abused. Yes. Taking it to the business aspect of things, Mr. Headpiece Kabala, who is a community development specialist, Pan-Africanist, One Africa Radio, TV, it's a platform where we would want to bring various aspects in terms of Africa as a continent. So as a business person and as a person who's now responsible for the development of the community, we're talking GBV. How has that impacted you working with the community with regards to GBV?
Thank you first and foremost for having us here, and greetings to all the panelists. So, from business perspective, I think you cannot take business out of the society because business is a part of the society. And if you want to understand what is affecting the business, you also need to understand what is affecting the society, and you can even go down to what is affecting the family in a particular society, because a society is a micro structure of every family that builds that society. Now, firstly, actually, by understanding the situation that we're having now of gender violence, gender-based violence, let me talk precisely violence against women, because when you talk about gender-based violence, it can be both ways, right? So the most important, I guess, is the one that is basically done against the woman, because that's more prevalent, right? Even though there's also a reverse order of things, right? So in Africa, we didn't have this, before. Africa, we used to have kings. For you to be a king, you need to have a queen next to you. So women were respected in Africa. You couldn't have a god if you didn't have a goddess. So we need to trace the starting point of violence against women in Africa. Where did we start to become, as my prince next to me said, when did we, us as a man, start to become violent against women? And from the moment that we understand how we became kind of violent, then it becomes easier to see what can be the way forward, and becomes even easier to analyze what is happening within the business, what is happening within the whole society. So myself, I'll look at it from a psychological level, from social psychology, so to say, whereby before you even begin an action of violence against any human being, you need firstly to dehumanize that person in your mind. It's the only way you can then justify your action against that person. It's the same thing, for example, that happened against the Jewish during the Holocaust. There were a lot of propaganda against them. Jewish are this and that. So already when you have that narrative, that picture in the mind, then it's easier to kill a Jewish person, because that this person anyway is whatever that was, branded on them. So it's the same thing with the violence today. Let's say, for example, against the woman, even against men as well. We have a society that has already created a picture in our mind. Let me give an example. Before an example, the picture that has been created is even accepted by some female. I discussed with a lot of female, either those I'm working with, or those that are friends. You see that the perception, sometimes they'll tell you, you know what, I'm a good girl, but sometimes I can be a bad bitch. somebody tells you that already in the image of the person, they think that sometimes I can be a bitch. So that is an object already. So when you reduce the image of a person to that kind of object, it's easy then to apply violence against, or to treat that person in a way that a bitch, is supposed to be treated.
Yeah.
And I take that to the whole society. Look on the social media, most of platforms, you see TikTok, Instagram.
Yeah.
Look, what is the image that is being portrayed there of a woman?
Okay. I'm going to introduce Felicity because of, I think, as from the business aspect of things, there's always an issue of finance, as we've alluded to say. One of the implications that would also lead to women being abused comes from the element of financial dependency. So Felicity Guest is an economic and financial abuse specialist who focus area on the child maintenance. One of the major things is that when there's abuse that is happening in families, whether it's between a boyfriend and a girlfriend, a wife and a husband, once that GBV thing comes into place, or the abuse comes into the place, usually the kids then suffer. A man decides to go her ways. So I think is it a financial abuse that you go from the emotional abuse, you go from the physical abuse, and then we then experience the financial abuse. So Felicity, welcome to One Africa Radio. As we are having the conversation, can you kindly take us through the work that you've done so far with regards to the GBV?
Sure. As we go into 16 days of activism again, we tend to focus on the physical forms of abuse, the traditional ones, the overt forms, and we tend not to focus on the covert, which are the invisible and silent ones. So the work that we focus on, that I focus on, is bringing the invisible forms of gender-based violence, domestic violence, to the mainstream. Economic and financial abuse is. So let me start there. It's a pattern of behaviors that is coercive and controlling to limit one's freedom of choices. So in this specific area, it would be because in relationship, it would be creating dependence, which speaks into the power imbalance. So that is normally limiting one's economic opportunities. Freedom of choice. And the physical aspect is often when women are beaten up, they can't go to work, so it affects their income opportunities. And also joint bank accounts, where one person controls a bank account and limits the other person's access to the money that they have equally contributed to. So that's all to create dependence. So when there is abuse in a relationship, when one wants to leave, they don't have the economic resources to be able to make that choice. And often we see in relationships that women pay for the soft things like food, electricity, and the men normally pay for the assets, the cars, the bond. So when relationships become troublesome, women are told, I'll pay the rent, this is my house, and you will leave my house. And that creates the insecurity. Where do women go to? And particularly if they have children, because they either go to family or they are forced to flee into shelters. And then what choices do they have? They don't have social security, so they tend to go back to abusive relationships. And women are choosing violence over poverty. So if we look post our law is not designed or implemented in a way that protects women. And that's historic. White men made the legislation to suit and benefit white men. And our constitution made a concerted effort to address all of that. But within that, women are still not protected by the legislation. So the economic vulnerability of women intersections with every aspect: education, healthcare, and it makes women incredibly vulnerable for the rest of their lives.
Thank you so much, Felicity, for that input. Taking from the aspect of the justice system and the constitution. We are joined here by our attorney, Ms. Malebo Matlokhwane, who then, take us through in terms of the system itself, where it has to deal with the GBV. Is the information out there that is educating our women or the victims of gender-based violence? What's your take on that?
Thank you, Kuti, and thank you to everyone that is here. Well, the law does provide a process to assist people that are going through GBV.
Mm-hmm.
What usually happens is that a complainant can approach the nearest magistrate court to apply for protection order. So the purpose of the protection order is to basically stop the respondent from further violating the person's rights. You understand? So when this happens, you go to court, you report the incident, you gather all the sufficient evidence, and once the evidence has been submitted to the clerk of the court, there's going to be a return date. On the return date, that's when the respondent will actually try and convince the magistrate as to why the protection order shouldn't be granted. But if the magistrate is of the opinion that the protection order must be granted, then it's going to be granted, and that order is final, meaning that should the respondent decide to contravene the order, then he or she may be arrested for the said act. However, when you look at most GBV cases, the annoying thing about it is that people report such cases, but when it's time to now act on it, or once it's time to go to court and actually discuss the case, most women tend to pull out. And the reason for pulling out, they will tell you that they are dependent on their husband, and then if they get arrested, it would mean that they won't have food. So clearly women are aware of the rights that they have, and they are aware that there is a law that is there to protect them. But when it's time to act, they start off strong, but end off slow. You understand?
In a scenario, Oscar Pistorius has been given a parole, of which, when we talk GBV and how the whole incident happened, was it a case of poverty? Was it a case of someone does not have money? And let's look at the justice system to say, was it enough? Did Pistorius serve enough time? What's your take on that?
Personally, I think he didn't serve enough time for what he did. I feel like it's also painful to the family for losing their daughter to such a crime. But at the end of the day, the law has to take its course, in a sense that there are certain expectations that we have from the law. However, at the end of the day, if he's considered to be someone that is well behaved, someone who is compatible to get parole, then there's nothing that we can do. So that's my take.
Moving to the most interesting guest here, Ms. Amanda Ndebele, the founder of the People of Victory Foundation. You deal with various programs within your organization, your mental wellness. You deal with family issues, and gender-based violence. It's one program that is close to your heart. Take us through in terms of what is it that you are offering from the community aspect of things in terms of assisting the victims of gender-based violence.
Okay. Thank you for that, and I would like to greet the panelists as well. So from understanding GBV and not only focusing on the women and the children, but focusing on all the genders, I feel as if we still have a very big gap that we need to fill when it comes to GBV. In particular, for this reason, we have focused on women and empowering women and children. And we haven't paid much attention that by so doing, we're empowering these women to go back to a hands of a perpetrator who is not empowered. Which then brings us back to we are moving in, we're just going in circles. I feel as if we won't achieve what we want to achieve, but we can achieve what we want to achieve by involving all the genders. So what we do under the People of Victory Foundation is that all of the issues that we tackle, it comes back to mental health. What is the mental state of the victim and what is the mental health state of the perpetrator? What causes the perpetrator to do what they do? So by so doing, we've partnered with different organizations, and the one close to my heart is the Department of Correctional Service, where we go there and we speak to the men in particular who are inside for different crimes and prepping them to come back to the society, because abuse is broad. When we look at GBV, we focus on women and children, we focus on rape, we focus on physical abuse, but we're forgetting that there's so much to abuse that leads to all the problems that we have.
Quite interesting. I just love the aspect of the culture, the tradition. And I'm going to put it up to you, Prince Mabena, in a sense that, yes, the focus is more of women being abused. We overlooking the fact that men also get abused in the process. And for us to have a healing nation, we can't heal the other and leave the other. So from the African aspect of things, how do we then strengthen, take our men back and give them the responsibility? It's a mental state where there's a shift of things in terms of where we come from and where we are at today. So I need you to take me through in terms of the challenges that we are having as a country, that a man is expected to be a man. But what happens in a situation where a man is being abused by a woman? Will that man be brave enough to come to you and say, Prince, hey, I've been beating up every night? So how do we deal with such scenarios?
You see, transition, it's never easy. Transition and change, they are always a problem because there is resistance. So where there is resistance, you're never going to find a balance because someone needs victory. And this is where the problem. We shouldn't look at it in a manner of saying who must be victorious. But in a human space, what is a human being designed to do? If we get to a space where we all respect our roles as per nature, then I think we will be able to achieve more. Not to say that it's difficult for a man to come out because culturally and previously, men knew that they have to withstand pain. A man does not cry. That's the language that we normally use, to say a man does not cry. And you can't take your own problems and shade with your neighbor or anyone because of fear of being seen as a weak person, being seen as unable to control your own family. But with that said, the most important thing here that we must all capture is that without culture, we are nothing. All these things, let me maybe tap into the spiritual world, because I see it's something that sometimes we run away from. We are spiritual beings. So if your spiritual alignment is not in order from your family background, then you will be bound to be lost, because every spiritual that moves around may end up incarnating itself in you. And then you end up behaving in an abnormal way, which now we find men into that space. So that same spirituality can also be incarnated into a woman.
President, we giving red card to any form of gender-based violence. From the African aspect, the Prince, has taken us even putting in the issues of spirituality. I agree. It's quite a a challenging space where you need to bring in the issues of policy, what people believe in what they see, and then bringing the issues of spirituality when they don't even know what you're talking about in terms of beliefs and religion. Now, African Renaissance is brought. We're tapping into the culture of how we do things. Are we doing enough?
I don't think we're doing enough, and I'd like to actually support the Prince, what he says. And if we don't know who we are, we don't have our identity, we get lost. And I think that's been one of the biggest foundation of where we are now. All our problems originate from us not knowing who we are. It's funny that other races, they know who they are. Whites know who they are. Indians, they know who they are. Jews knows who they are. But it's only us that, we are still confused and still trying to find ourselves. Yet we do have African spirituality that will lead us and tell us, who exactly are we. I mean, you need to go back to your roots as a person. So I'd like to actually, applaud the Prince for touching that, because I was a bit, skeptical of should I go that deep or not. But I think it's a conversation like this, and the truth needs to come out. As youth leaders, as he is coming from a youth leader organization, it's the generation that will take us to the next level of knowing where we are.
From the Kokosatu perspective, Ms. Tulisile Msima, we're talking government, we're talking constitution, we're talking legislature, and my concern most of the time when we'll be seeing a whole lot of campaigns with awareness that has been taking place for quite some time now. Is government investing resources to ensure that whoever who is in the government space is equipped well to address issues of GBV internally and externally?
Honestly, no. Resources are there, but there is no development for the officials that are meant to oversee such processes. Most of the time, you, as a victim, you are the one who will then go back to your workplace and say, by the way, I read Malebu's article. It says you must do this to protect me. So please assist me. So I think where government might be lacking is ensuring that they skill and reskill the personnel that is already in office. Because we do have sufficient financial support. I would not say, it's enough. It can never be enough, because you need to go through a lot of processes in order for you to even get a psychologist to assist you in the workplace. But resources are there, I can assure you. And with the legislations that are put in place, at times, as our labor federation, we look at it as though government is just putting them in place for the sake of adhering, but they themselves get overwhelmed with what is happening. Because when you look at funding for homes for abused women and children, they lack funding. And there is a budget that is given to, that is allocated for such, but there is no funding. Therefore, I must then move from the workplace. I'm being victimized at home by my partner, who then kicked me out, as Felicity has indicated, that if you don't do this, leave my house. As I leave the house, I've absconded from work because I was scared to tell my male manager that my husband is abusing me, because he will then say, you deserve it, anyway, because that is the mentality that is there. So I then have to go to friends or family, and family loves you when you are okay. The minute you have challenges, family does not want you. So you have to now move with your kids to this shelter. When you get to the shelter is having its own problems. even social workers are not even on vicinity, whereas they are appointed to be there to support such houses. So I think, hence I say, we need to skill and reskill and learn what we've been doing wrong so that we can try and move forward with really implementing what we are saying needs to change in our policies.
What are the implications from the aspect of saying a woman is not going to be in a position to can actually go and report the person who's abusing her based on the affordability, the independence that is there. So how do we then skill them? Like Ms. Msimang has alluded that it's more of now giving them the resources to be able to cope within the environment, to say, you might be taking care of me, but it doesn't give you a right, to wake up and beat me for no reason. So how then do we align the resources that we are currently having to make sure that we upskill, we educate, we empower these women?
I think Usisi from Kosato raised a very valid point when she spoke about skilling and upskilling and, unlearning what we have been taught. Because I feel as if we still need to unsail that men are trash, so that we bring them back, we bring them to the party. What has shifted them from attending all of these GBV conversations is because they feel like they're always under attack. Therefore, no matter how much they can try and perform at their level best for their families and their kids and their community, it's going to be difficult because now they are careful and mindful. Should I try and lend a helping hand to this woman walking down the road, I might just be seen as someone mugging her or sexual harassing her or whatever the case. So we still need to now then try and fit our men into these conversations and say, come on board. How are your feelings towards GBV? And then we come back to the women to say, now again, it also comes back to culture, because don't forget that we as a black society come from our grandmothers who were staying at home while our grandfathers went to look for work. So that is how we were raised, and that's what we believe, that a man then takes care of a household. And now, because there's this 50-50, it's very challenging. As much as you can skill the woman, but we need to visit the culture. We need to unlearn and unsay things that we have said, so that mentally the mind can come back and say, okay, on a clean slate, from the woman's point of view and the men's point of view, how can we rebuild? Now it's a matter of rebuilding from both genders, so that they all come to the party. But the skills and the resources are there. I work with a lot of government institutions. There's a lot of skills development programs, and there's a lot of opportunities for women, for a woman to be able to stand up on her own and be able to feed her kids and not rely on the perpetrator, to be able to also get a certain skill to start a business. There's a lot of programs, but it still comes back. Nature will lead you into the hands of a man. How do we then solve that? Because at the end of the day, you are going to give birth to a child with a man. You can't have it any other way. And what conversations are you having with a child who comes from a perpetrator? So it's I think it's if we can start there, if you can start from both genders to try and bring them on board.
Okay, Mr. Kabala, my gentleman, from the Pan-Africanist space, in short, in closing, what message do you have for men out there as we mark the 16 days of activism opposing the abuse of women and children? What message do you have to send to every man who is out there, who is doing a good job, to say to this other man who is also an abuser to change the status quo?
Well, I mean, as a Pan-Africanism is all about rebuilding Africa. So the message to men is, you cannot build or rebuild Africa without having women next to you, and in a more constructive manner, not just next to you as an object, but as being there as a partner in the in the agenda of rebuilding Africa. So it's very important that we go back to the basics, the cultures all the queens have mentioned. but knowing as well that culture is not static, culture is dynamic. There are things, if what we are talking about culture, we need to question is the culture of today, which is almost Europeanized, or is a culture of yesterday before colonialism. Because you want to go back there where women had some kind of dress code, and then you want to compare to today, you have a conflict. So we have to have balance. It's a very difficult question, right? So, but the bottom line is, we can only rebuild Africa when we are able to build strong families where men and women are next to each other and building each other. And when you go beyond, or when you go against that order, then you don't have a proper structure through which you can rebuild Africa. And if I want to close maybe with a message to our queens, is to say, when you look at the time that feminism came into Africa, is the time that also the cases of gender-based violence, become more and more. And then you need to question why is the case, because you have apparently a movement that is supposed to end gender-based violence, but you also have on the other side more cases of gender-based violence. And then when you analyze, you come to understand that feminism from the starting point was a tool that I don't want to sound racist, but a tool that a white woman used to claim his space, next to his male, because during that time, women were eventually dehumanized as well in Europe, as much as Africans were dehumanized. So they had to fight to have equal space, next to their men. Now we still have a situation where black men or African men is still kind of dehumanized or dissented or marginalized economically, socially speaking. So when the African woman embrace the same agenda of feminism to fight now to gain equal space next to his man, the man who is at the same time also dehumanized or dissented or marginalized. So it's a fight that has no purpose. So the message to the African woman is that don't fight your man to claim your space, because your man doesn't have the power he's still disempowered. So, so to say, socially speaking, economically. So your fight is not against your African man. Your fight is against the system. And the best way to change the whole situation, to correct the whole things of gender-based violence, is to change the system. And once we address the systemic, because it's a systemic issue, we address it to be able to address a lot of things.
Ms. Malebu Matlohan, from the legal aspect of things, you've mentioned earlier on the challenge where women will open cases and drop them and still go back to the same situation. After 2 weeks, goes back again, open a case. So what message do you have in terms of encouraging them from the legal aspect of things to say it's not too late for them to can leave the relationship? There are resources that have been made available. So what message do you have in terms of encouraging them not to drop the cases?
Okay, to all South African women and African women, I feel like they must stand up for themselves, fight for what's right, and break the silence. And in everything, they must know that there's always light at the end of the tunnel, because what happens is that when they're in the dark, they're always of the opinion that things will never be okay. So as women, we must also try and uplift one another, fix each other's crowns, and just keep it moving. But in the end, there will be justice.
Ms. Amanda Ndebele,
Yes.
your last words with regards to the message as we commemorating the 16 days of activism.
I'd just like to support his statement. I think if we can rebuild our family structures, because we are not in competition, but the system has made us fight against each other, whereas we need each other and we can't live without each other. So if we can revisit that family structure and understand the role of a woman and the role of a man and not compete against, because I think the setup is the same setup that we find in a work environment where you have your own title and your own role, and I can't move from supervisor and start playing your role maybe as administrator. That's the type of setup that we need in the family structure as well. And that way we can better groom our kids to say, if you are the firstborn sister, this is your role. If you are the brother, this is your role. And in understanding that at the end of the day, I feel as if the whole entire impact GBV that has been made, we are not winning, because we have empowered women, they are now skilled, they're now running businesses, and we have broke men. Right?
Yes.
So let's try and have both genders come to the party. But my last message to the women and the men is that let's always understand who we are and where we come from as Africans before we tap into the system, before we can take our references from the system, from social media and everything.
Yes.
But let's understand first, who are we as Africans, and what do you need as a man from a woman, and what does the woman need from a man?
Taking it to Ms. Tulisile Msimang, from the government aspect of things, it's a great gesture when we see so many awareness, so many campaigns. It's not so long, our president last year was part of the summit under the GBV. It was moved from the 16 days, 365 days. It's important to make sure that we move away from this pandemic. Your last words in terms of the commemoration.
In terms of our message for the 16 days of activism, we are saying, can government strengthen the policing systems that are there so that each and every person, not just women, because we also cater for the elderly who are also abused, and we never get to touch on that. However, it's a topic for another day. We all feel safe, we all feel protected, and also remembering that we must ensure that for the future men to be well equipped and to be in space that we are at as women, we need to start bringing these young men, our boy child, into a a program of some sort where we ensure that the drug abuse that is there, because in this 16 days of activism, our kids are still doing a lot of drugs, and it's the boy child mostly that are found in the streets, begging and everything. So we are just saying, in this 16 days of activism, let's ensure that all of us are given an opportunity to feel safe and be reminded that we are loved, because that's one thing that we tend to forget. Just to tell someone that you care, someone that you love, it means a lot, and it makes a whole lot of difference. Thank you.
Coming to you, my president, African Renaissance, GBV, it's a very sensitive space. It's a very painful space. As Africans, it's worrying, coming back to where we're coming from culturally and traditionally. In closing, what message do you have as we are commemorating 16 days of activism?
I'd like to start off saying, taking from what Msimang has said, to say there's lots of program that the government, is giving out there, and what Amanda has also said as well, to say that women know this, have these skills programs, but there's a gap in between. You find that government has all these nice programs, but the people don't know these programs. So the message for me is, how do we bridge this gap? Can the government do more awareness on the programs that they have? So that the whole community is aware, and not just communicate those programs, but can they make sure that the programs that they design also cater for the people? Because you find that government will design a program that will not cater or work for the people. So can the two communities and the government come together when these programs are being designed? And lastly, to end off, 16 days of activism is not supposed to be 16 days of activism. We shouldn't be up in arms when it's 25th of November to the 10th of December. It should be an everyday thing. It should be part of our lifestyle, which, we've already spoken about how do we get there. We need to have functional families. We've got a lot of single parents that are raising boy child. How do you expect a boy child that is being raised by a single parent, to be out there and still, understand what they're being taught? So we need mentors. We need men that are gonna stand up and say, enough is enough. It's not just all the perpetrators, but we're also good men, and stand up and mentor the boy child, mentor the girl child as well. You know, because I know that as I was growing up, I was closest to my dad. You know, everything that I needed to know, I would not run to my mom, but I would run to my dad, which it's now a taboo because of the family structures that are destroyed. We no longer have those family structures. So as African Renaissance and Diaspora Network, we are giving a red card to all forms of discrimination and violence against women and girls. So I would like to hand over a red card. And a red card. And let's all, as African, give a red card to all forms of discrimination against girls and women. And let this conversation continue. And let's find, you know, solutions. Let's not just talk and talk and talk, and it ends up here. So when Malebu leaves, she needs to say, today I was in a platform, and I'm going to be helping another family. I'm going to be helping a boy child. I'm going to be helping a girl child, so that they understand their legal rights. You know, the government needs to come on board as well to say, how do we, you know, unite all communities so that we have a healthy communities, you know. And I'm happy with Amanda, and I hope we're going to be working together and continuing to make sure that, you know, there's progress and the awareness lives on. So yes, we're giving a red card to all forms of discrimination.
Thank you guys for making time. As I close off, 16 days of activism, it cannot be within the 16 days of activism. The awareness must continue. We want a healthy African space where women and children are in a position to can feel safe. So as I close, thank you so much for having me. We give red card to any form of abuse. Thank you.
Thank you.